This
This is all great.
conference will now be recorded.
This is
Sorry, I
also
forgot to record.
no, it's okay.
Okay.
I got to tell you a funny story while you're all here. I recently did this thing with a patient advocate. We were on Twitter and we decided to have this kind of coffee break and talk about what's going on and these issues. And the first mistake was that I put out the Zoom link on Twitter, and about halfway through, these trolls came in and started putting pornography and all this stuff on.
Oh no.
So as the host, I was kicking them out, and I was just, and then I found you could lock the meeting, and so just beware. There are weird people out there who like to do this type of stuff for whatever reason.
Oh, thank
But at
God.
any rate, yeah, it's a little bit scary right now. We've never dealt with anything like this, and I'm usually pretty, reserved in my kind of thought process on this. But this is really something. We've all had to adopt new policies. We're trying to keep patients away from our outpatient clinics and the hospital if we at all can. And I think it's really just new territory that we've never experienced before. So everyone be careful, do practice social distancing, try to stay at home right now as much as possible. We're nowhere near trying to flatten the curve, as everyone keeps saying. But we really have to still do this if we're going to get some traction on this. And cancer patients in particular.
Absolutely. Any questions for Dr. Ben from anyone?
I have a question.
Yeah.
It's really just kind of a curiosity. They talk about immunocompromised patients.
Mm-hmm.
Myself, I had my surgery in June of 2018, and I've seen how it's taken me a pretty long time. I had I had a surgery where they pretty much removed everything, although I was stage 1.
Mm-hmm.
And it's taken me a long time to get back my physical, because I was a weightlifter and all these things. So it's taken me a long time to get back, and I've seen how much my body was under stress during that time. At what period are you not considered immunocompromised? Like in terms of, okay, I had cancer in 2018, and I still have to go back every 3 months. When are you kind of like where your immune system isn't taxed as much anymore?
I think that's a great
Yeah,
question.
I was wondering the same thing.
I think they're great questions, and I think that there's no one-size-fits-all answer for this. Because the truth of the matter is it depends on what therapies you got and what therapies you may continue to be getting. And then there's also the after effects of certain therapies. As an example, there's newer work that has really shown that patients who get radiations, some, not all, but radiation therapy, can really have prolonged and profound decreases in their lymphocytes. And so predominantly T and B cells are what lymphocytes are. And those are really the kind of front line, if you will, of infection fighters. And so depending on the cancer, the stage, the type, really will probably dictate. I do think that most patients after a year where they've completed all their standard of care therapies will probably be okay. But a lot of that we measure objectively using blood tests, and then we can kind of ferret out, hey, is the white count here or is it here? What is the makeup of that white count? Is it mostly T cells or lymphocytes, I should say, versus what we call neutrophils? So if there is any doubt about that, I think just getting a routine blood count would help. But I also think there's other factors that we all know. Stress, for example, is a big immunosuppressive type of feature. And so we know that stress can induce steroids, and steroids can suppress the immune system. So whatever you can do to stay healthy, exercise, eat right, maintain your ideal body weight, avoid stress or mitigate stress, I think will go a long way into, preventing your immune system from being weakened.
Yeah. And I don't want to hog this. Just one more thing. When you said stress, it really makes me pay close attention, because in my case, I didn't have any genetic markers. There's no history. And I've been very healthy my whole life. And I was lucky, stage 1, no chemo, nothing. I didn't even have to take, I had to take an anastrozole for like a year, and that's it. But I did have, for 25 years, from almost being raped and killed, I had very bad PTSD.
Yeah.
I really think that stress is really the biggest, almost the biggest thing that we need to really focus on in these cancers, because I was constantly under feeling that fight or flight 24/7. So
Yep.
I think it's
Now,
a big,
one, thank you for sharing that, because I think it's important and it's brave of you to disclose that. But I think two, there are multiple, well, two main aspects of stress. One, the chronicity of what you're feeling can suppress the immune system, because again, you're going to be producing a lot of steroids that will suppress the immune system, and probably other things too that we still haven't figured out. But for sure, study after study has associated stress with worse outcomes. I think the second component, though, is probably in some ways much more important than the biologic component, if you will, and that's the mental component. I've always counseled all my patients to seek out mental health and well-being, because, at the end of the day, if the treatments are worse than the disease, and or if the psychological component doesn't allow our patients to resume their full life, I don't think we've done much good as cancer docs. And so we need to really make sure that we're also teaching and counseling our patients that getting professional help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of
yeah.
strength. I myself have seen therapists multiple times, because we're all immune to this, or none of us are immune to this. We're all susceptible to this, where, I've had great stressors in my life. I've had good friends die from car accidents and other things. I went through a horrible divorce a decade ago. These are the types of things that if you don't try to seek out help and really try to mitigate the emotional damage, I think it's going to have a biological effect, but it just impacts also your quality of life so much. So I encourage everyone to seek help, whatever that works for the individual.
Excellent. Thank you, Doc. Any other of the guys? You guys have any questions? There's Michael.
Yes, Dr. Park. Glad to see you, Dr. Park.
Good seeing you, Michael.
My question is, how has breast cancer research been affected by this COVID-19 and looking for a cure?
I wish I could tell you otherwise and said that nothing has been affected, but it's affected everything. And this is not unique to me or my research lab or even Vanderbilt, but across the globe and certainly the country. So you may or may not have heard, but there's travel bans everywhere. And so scientific conferences have been called off, where we often get together to collaborate about new ideas and catch up on collaborations. But I think probably the most chilling effect is because of the ban, if you will, on going to work. Unless you absolutely have to be there to see patients, what has happened is that most of us, including myself, have had to just shut down our labs. We're basically just working on a skeleton crew that will maintain things like if you have mouse experiments going on, if you have really, precious samples that took you years to actually get to that stage, because nobody wants to just, throw that away and pretty much destroy the career of a graduate student or a fellow. So we're doing the bare minimum that we can to maintain, but no new research is going on. No new hires are going on. It has really put a stop to progress. So I'm not going to lie to anyone. It is what it is. And I think now what we're trying to do is be creative. What can we do still that's productive in terms of trying to cure cancer, and breast cancer specifically, looking at computers, thinking about how do we write for new ideas and new grant mechanisms. The NCI and the NIH have also been very accommodating, and deadlines and certain things that they used to, kind of the bane of our existence, they've kind of just said, you know what, we're going to take a back seat to this and let you guys, give you guys exceptions and exemptions to kind of recover. But it's going to take a while before we fully recover. And most of us feel like this is not going to end in, a few weeks. I think the best case scenario we can hope for is that hopefully by early summer, this is kind of, going downhill in terms of the new cases that are being reported.
When you're given the green light, how long will it take you to ramp up to where you might be with your lab and experiments now?
I know this sounds crazy, but it is already almost April, right? It's March 26th. Right. So I actually think probably around the end of this calendar year, most people will be back to where they are fully. And there's going to be exceptions to that. I'm really happy to see you, Michael, because New York, as we all know, has been hit really hard with this. And I think that area of the country is going to take longer. Nashville is a little bit different than the rest of Tennessee because we're kind of a hub of a lot of people and activity. So we have a lot of the cases that are positive, but thankfully, we're not anywhere near as the hotspot zones that we've seen on different coasts and other areas of the country. So stay safe, Michael.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Any other questions for Dr. Ben? And if not, we'll go on to Michael Brammer from
Hi, how you
FAM
doing?
Gen X. There we go.
So, do you have to give me permission to share my screen, or?
Do we, Brett? I don't think
Yes,
so.
I'll take care
Oh,
of it.
there. Here's Rick. Rick is ANCAN. He got on. Mr. Rick Davis is our hero because he gives us the space.
And let
He's the
me
guru.
say tonight, we had a great meeting for your dress rehearsal. Somehow or other, you got into the wrong room.
Yeah, yes.
But I keep having a good time here, so that's
Excellent.
fun. Janai?
Yes, hi.
Yeah, I'm just saying, somehow or other, you got into the wrong room. I just came out of the meeting with Ilana, and we had a very good meeting.
Okay.
But
Oh,
I'll talk to you later about that. Don't worry. Looks like you're having a good time here. So
that's right. She's learning.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Well, just switch. I could switch to the other room.
And also, Peggy, you have two folks who are on the telephone that you might want to introduce.
All right. Who would that? Do we know who it is?
I think you already did that earlier on, Peggy.
Yeah, we did an introduction with everybody.
Oh,
So
you
I think
did? You
yeah,
did that?
I just wasn't able to change the name. I couldn't figure it out. It wouldn't
Okay.
let me.
All
Yeah.
right. So,
All right.
The other room?
Yeah, we
So-
got it.
okay. So, but the other room is now closed, but we'll talk later.
All right. So you get Mike to share his screen.
I'm gonna make Mike a presenter right now,
Perfect.
and you should be able to share your screen in one moment. Right, at this point, you should be able to share your screen, Mike.
Yeah, it shows you as presenter. Okay.
You're looking puzzled.
There we go.
There
I
he
think I
goes.
got
He
it.
got it.
Is that it?
Excellent. Yeah, you did. Excellent.
All right, we're there. So let me. I don't see a timer in front of me. So can somebody, Jamie, cut me off like when we get 15 minutes left, because I want to leave some time for some questions.
Sure.
But I'm going to try and go through this fairly quickly. Just by bit of background, let me just give you a little history on who you're talking to. So I launched a company back in 1996. So the company was Progeny Software, and what it was a pedigree drawing software that back then a lot of researchers were trying to find out, okay, why are we seeing incidences of cancer in families, and what is the link to these people? Ultimately, they called them gene hunters. So these were researchers and scientists that were trying to figure out what genes are linked to which diseases. So in the case of breast cancer, you've got the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes. You've also now, fast forward to today, and you've got, Lynch syndrome genes. You've got it all. And so there's a lot more diseases now that have been tied to genes. But when I launched this company in 96, a lot of these researchers were doing studies where they would just gather as much information as they could on all these families with high incidences of cancer all over the world. They kind of did it the same. And in 2015, I ended up selling the company to Ambry Genetics. They're a diagnostic testing lab out in California. So they're the company that when you would send a swab, you'd send it to Ambry Genetics, or your clinician would. Ambry would run it through their DNA sequencers and then get back to you to let you know if you were positive for the BRCA1 gene in the case of breast cancer. So I sold the company to them and then worked for them for a couple of years. And then in 2018, I kind of decided to do it all over again. And only this time I wanted to take a different approach. And the different approach was, I wanted to build something that made more sense for the times that we're in. The previous company, I sold my software to researchers that were doing studies on families. But in dealing with them, I found that it really wasn't the ideal scenario. They really wanted something that allowed patients to kind of do their own family histories. And so that's what led me to believe that there's a need for something like an app where you can do your own family history. So the great thing for me today is I get to talk to people that are knee deep in this, and all of you are. And we did kind of a what you call a soft release. We've not done a press release yet. The reason is we wanted to get some people to use the app to then give us feedback to make sure that it actually does what we're saying that it does. And then that way, once we're kind of comfortable that we got it to a point where it needs to be, then we can go ahead and do a press release. So my hope today was that somebody on this call, I don't expect all of you to do it, but maybe a few of you will be kind of intrigued by it. You'll download the app, you'll go ahead and fill it out. And then because I know you now, because I've been on this call, you'll send an email to us and we'll definitely get back to you. So if you can give us some feedback, that would just be awesome for us. But I'll kind of walk you through this. I'm going to skip through these screens. These are screens that just give you information on how important family history is. You know, myself being in the business for 20 years, talking to all of the top accounts that I dealt with in my previous history, you kind of, when you're dealing with people that are in genetics, they all know how important family history is. You don't have to sit down and try and convince them. When you talk to the CIOs of healthcare companies, or even the EMR vendors, you know, the big boys, Epic and Cerner, you know, sometimes you got to sit with them and be like, guys, you know, we got to explain this to you. This is critical stuff. But they got so many things going on. They just, you know, it's not higher on their priority list. But family history is one of the major indicators to what kind of risk people are at in terms of hereditary risk. And a lot of times a top one is hereditary cancer. I mean, it's just, there's no doubt about it. You guys already know this, but male breast cancer is a huge deal when it comes to family history. It's a major deal, unlike some of the other cancers. But if you just look at cancer in general, you know, the general population is somewhere at that below 10% threshold or around there. When you have somebody that's a first degree relative with breast cancer, it starts to go up. And then the second you have two, then it really jumps. I'm sure everybody remembers when Angelina Jolie made her announcement in the New York Times, but testing went up like 60% after that day because it was a real world case scenario that everybody kind of, you know, recognized that, okay, this could happen to anybody. Really quick, I'm just going to mention like what we built. So it is kind of like a platform. What's unique is it's patients that are kind of in control. So you as a patient download the app, you do your family history, you have the ability to share with other family members, and I'll explain that in a minute. It's really cool stuff. But this is kind of one of the first leading edge technologies where you are going to be in control of your own electronic medical record. So you're doing your family history. You're going to keep it from now till, you know, as long as you want, but you're in control. So you can ultimately share with your clinician. 5 years from now, you may change clinicians and you'll be able to share with them. And so you kind of maintain control. You're doing the family history, and it's a record that you're going to constantly update from time to time. Now, if you look at the key feature, what is it? It's we call it Fam Share, but it's the ability for you to share with other family members. And really, this is where the real value comes in. So let's just kind of walk through the scenario. Somebody on this call today downloads the app. Okay, they do the app, they fill it out, they put in their information. It asks them questions about their family history, so they fill that out. They put in their brothers, their sisters, aunts and uncles on your mom's and dad's side. And then you invite one of your siblings. So you invite, let's say you invite your sister. Your sister gets this code, she downloads the app, she puts the code in, and then lo and behold, it copies everything that you've done. So you did the whole family history, it copies it over to your sister. Your sister then kind of just scrolls through it and says, yeah, that's right. And then lo and behold, she sees that you put breast cancer on your dad's sister. And she's like, hey, wait a minute, that wasn't dad's sister that had that, it was mom's sister. And so she goes ahead and changes that. Well, it sends you a notification saying, hey, your sister just changed this. Is she right? Yes or no? Do you want to update your record? So if you say yes, that means you agree with what she did. But if you say no, you're like, no, she doesn't know what she's talking about. She's wrong. Then you maintain that record the way that you understand it. So you're always in control of your own record. And then that's what's ultimately shared with your clinician. The idea here is as you bring in more family members, especially when you bring in like the next generation, like a generation that's above you. So like your aunt or your uncle, the level of accuracy greatly increases when that happens because your aunt or uncle is going to know a lot more about the people in their generation than you are because you're an entire generation removed. But the second you start sharing with somebody that's in a generation above you or below you, the accuracy just skyrockets because they're within 1 degree of the people they're reporting on. And that updates your record. So as long as people contribute, everybody's updating and the accuracy goes way up. This obviously solves a major problem for the clinicians because they're already bogged down with a lot of data that they're gathering, and they just unfortunately don't have time to help you circumvent your family and find out who's got what and what's accurate and what isn't. Well, this app kind of does that for them. It provides the ability for you to do that. Really quick, just so everybody's crystal clear on this, because it's a big issue today. We are not at all like the social media companies. We do not sell your data. We don't do anything with your data. Your data is on our platform solely for the purpose of you sharing it with your clinician. So your data is protected. It's our obligation to protect your data. We don't sell it or do anything with it unless you want to consent it. So if you want to consent it to researchers, you can do that. There may be an opportunity down the road where we think that there might be some data brokering that can happen. There's talk of that right now in the marketplace, but not a lot of people doing it. But that may be an opportunity down the road. But your data would never leave you without your consent. You would always be in control of that. You would decide whether you want to do that or not. So we're big proponents on that. I was going to share this just because I think you might find it interesting, but we're going to be rolling, right now we have servers in the United States. We are going to be rolling out servers in Canada, Germany, London, and Australia. And the reason is because the people in those countries are working towards data privacy laws that maintain that their data has to be stored on servers in their country. So Canada actually already does this. If you're going to use healthcare software, it has to store patient data on servers in Canada. And so that's kind of how we're approaching that is users download the app and then they just, if they're in the EU, it's going to be stored on servers in the EU. So I'm going to kind of walk you through just how the app looks. I mean, you'll kind of figure this out if you download it and try it out, but it's kind of like any other app. You fill out a standard, account profile. We then start to dig into questions about yourself. Now, just so you're aware, the questions that we ask you up front, we call that during the onboarding process, it will determine if you're at average risk of the general population or increased risk. And increased risk would be based on the American College of Medical Genetics guidelines as well as the NCCN guidelines. So that's the National Comprehensive Cancer Network. Those are like the top 30 cancer centers in the United States. So those guidelines are in our software, and we will let you know if you trigger any of those guidelines. One of the things you see on the screen right there is that clinician ID. So, let's say somebody on this call was directed by Dr. Park at Vanderbilt to download the app. So Vanderbilt would have a unique clinician ID, and you would then put that in right here on the screen, and then the Vanderbilt logo would show up. So that lets you know you're now connected to your doctor, and that allows Dr. Park to log into our portal and view the family history that you completed. So once you connect with the clinician via the app, they have the ability to log in and do that. You guys today that downloaded are not going to have a clinician ID for anybody specific, so you'll just skip the screen. And then what we do is we just ask you questions about your history. So if you were diagnosed with cancer, you'll click on cancer. You'll then put in, breast. It'll then prompt you through some follow-up questions. You'll put in the age of diagnosis, and then you'll select anything that applies. And then you kind of move on. If there's ever a question you're like kind of not sure what to do, there's little eyes throughout the app. You just click it and it'll tell you. It'll say, okay, look, here's what we're looking for here. Now, what I would like you guys to do, if anybody on this call does download this, is as you go through this, if you get stuck on something or you're like, God, I can't follow what they're asking here, I kind of need to know that. I need that feedback because it's really critically important for us to get real world feedback from people that literally use the app, especially when have had cancer themselves. I mean, this is incredibly important that this is done right. And so there are lists that we provide, those predefined lists: blood, cancer, heart, mental, behavioral, neurological. If you click on under other conditions, we just list what the top diseases are. We are going to be putting in a feature. It's not in the software yet, but we are going to be adding this. But it's the ability for you to type in anything. So that any condition, any disease, we do an automated search on an ontology database. That ontology database contains all kinds of conditions. So really, it'll handle anything. But that's not in the software yet. These last couple questions are, again, specific to the guidelines that I mentioned, the NCCN and ACMG guidelines. So if you've ever been genetically tested, it's important to know what genes you tested positive for. It's also important to know what genes you tested negative for, if you happen to know that. So this is data that would be important to other family members if you did actually get tested positive or negative. So when you're done with your personal health history, there's not really a lot there, but when you're done, we then pivot to your family. And so we kind of tell you, okay, look, we're going to now gather information on your family members. Because everybody's got two parents, we're going to automatically inject those. We're also going to automatically inject your parents' parents. So parents and grandparents automatically get added to the screen. And then to enter data for somebody, you just click on them. So if you click on your mom, that screen on the right is her profile that's going to pop up. Now, it's nice if you do go through the hassle and putting in all the data. I mean, I know it's going to take you a while, but it would be nice for the first family member that you invite, because then they don't have to do anything. But you do have an option here. You don't necessarily have to do all this. You can just invite them and then they do it themselves. But let's say you go ahead and you put your mom's first name in, you put her last name, and then you put in her vital status, and then you put her date of birth or her current age. Any kind of, and this is kind of an important thing because this is some of the feedback that we did get from people. Any kind of unique relationship is always edited in the profile. So like, let's say you have a half brother. What you do is you add your brother first, you then click on him, and then you scroll down and you change whoever the half parent is. So like in the case of, your half brother, you might share the same mom, but the dad is different. So on your half brother, you're just going to click on the father and change it. Okay. So if the person is a twin, then you add the brother first, and then you go into their profile and then you say, yes, this person's a twin. And then that's how you do it. Or if the person's actually adopted, you would do it there. So to change any kind of special relationship, you do it inside the profile. But the way you add, you just click the little plus button. So I need to add my children. So I add a son or a daughter. I then click on them. The profile pops up. I enter the information. Now, if you want to know like what's the most important thing to enter, it's definitely their current age. So if you can do their date of birth, that's awesome. It'll automatically calculate the current age. But then obviously if they've ever been diagnosed with a disease, those are like the two major data points. Because the clinicians that log into our system, they actually have the ability to run cancer risk algorithms. So we have cancer risk algorithms from like the top researchers in the world. Cancer Research UK has an algorithm called Tyre-Cuzick, which does 5-year expected cancer rates as well as lifetime expected cancer rates based on current age and age of diagnosis. So if you do put those two data points in, those are like the most important things. And then it just kind of goes through the rest of your family. You do your brothers and sisters, you do your aunts and uncles on your mom's side, you do your aunts and uncles on your dad's side. Now, when you're done with doing your family, from that point forward, if you ever log into the software, then you always get taken to what's called the dashboard. So the dashboard is what you're always going to see. And this is an app that you guys are not going to use daily, obviously. It's going to be an app that you kind of use like maybe once a year or as things happen, right? So if something changes with you, you'd actually go in here and put in the diagnosis. And then anybody that you're sharing with in your family is actually going to get that update. But as you're looking at the dashboard, if you click on yourself there at the top, on the right-hand side, you get your profile. So you'll scroll down and change anything that changes. If you click on family, you're going to get your family members. So everybody that's in the app that you've added is there. So in the case of like when you invite your sister, she doesn't have to go through what you had to go through, the onboarding process, because you've already done it. So when she logs in, she's at the dashboard. She'll click on family. She comes here, and then she just scrolls to see what you did. So like in the case of your mom, you've got her high blood pressure, age 38, diabetes at age 37. She'll be able to see that as she logs in. Now, I should mention that screen that you're looking at right there, it's not in the software yet. It's like 2 weeks away. So right now the list is just straight up and down. You can see it's kind of a little offset there, but that's something we just added. It'll be in there in 2 weeks, though, with that release. On the survey side of things, there's actually the ability to do custom surveys. So like if you do connect with, in the example I gave you, Vanderbilt. So if you connected with a clinician, that clinician has the ability to send you custom surveys. So if it turns out that they're doing research on something and they now deem that it's important, they may send you a survey. And kind of how you see that little 5, that 5 next to family updates, you'd see like a 1 right here under surveys. You get a notification, you click on it, it prompts you, you fill out the survey. When the survey's done, you're done. And then your clinician gets that data. So it's kind of a way for them to communicate back and forth with you on data that's important to them. Now, if you do click on risk, the only thing that right now we ship with the software is cancer risk. So that's the only thing that we're showing to users of the app. So there is not heart risk or diabetes. We're going to be adding that later. But right now, if you click on cancer risk, it is going to show you, okay, you're either at average risk of the general population or you're at increased risk. So if you are at increased risk, we do tell you what it is that you triggered. So male breast cancer, age 45 or younger. So as you invite other family members, they'll be able to click on this button and it's going to tell them whether they're at average risk or increased risk of the general population. And if they are, it's going to tell them why. Now there at the bottom, you see that button, genetic resources. If they click on that, there are links to educational content about cancer. There's also a link to find a genetic counselor. So that'll link to the National Society of Genetic Counselors page. And you can actually find a genetic counselor close to you to ask questions about whether or not, you should be tested if you're at an increased risk. At the moment, we're in discussions with a telemedicine company that actually does remote telemedicine with genetic counselors on staff. So we will be adding that option shortly here. So that's also an option. But the reality of the matter is, no matter what you determine with this app, it's really nothing but informational purposes. I mean, this is something you absolutely should share with your current healthcare provider. So whoever you're currently seeing, your doctor, this is kind of the stuff that you'd want to share with them and then let them decide what's the next appropriate steps. That family updates that I mentioned, I mean, this is what shows up like anytime you invite somebody like your sister, and if they make changes, they're going to show up here. So your record never gets changed unless you review it and then you either accept it or deny it. So you're kind of always in control. If people start updating things, you'll see it appear here, and then you just decide whether or not you want to update it or accept it. Once you do accept it, that data then gets pushed to your clinician. So if you originally connect with your clinician, you fill out family history, all of a sudden you start inviting family members, and then data's starting to change. You then go and you accept it. Well, then those updates will eventually propagate to the clinician. So obviously 6 months from now, if you get a sister that's diagnosed with breast cancer, you accept it. If you're still connected to your clinician, they get an update letting them know that that happened. And then that way, if it changes your risk, they'll be aware of it. The documents section, this isn't in there yet. It's a feature we're adding in the next couple of weeks as well, but it's the ability for you to upload PDFs. So you might have a PDF of a pathology report or a PDF of a genetic test that one of your family members got. They can actually add that.
Mike, you're about 15 minutes.
15 minutes away. Okay, we're pretty much done. The clinicians I just mentioned to you, you can always add those if you want. So if somebody is on our system and you want to invite them, you can do it. Kind of like that telemedicine company I was mentioning to you about. If once we add them, if you wanted to add them, you could. They have to accept your invitation. The sharing settings is where you control who you share with. So everybody in your family, you have the ability to decide, do I just want to be open about it and share with them? Or do I want to block somebody for some reason? And unfortunately, families are families. So it does happen. And, you might be in a situation where you just don't want to share with this particular person. That's okay. You go in and you turn them off and you don't share with them. You can actually share with somebody, but then not receive updates from them. Or you might want to receive updates from somebody, but you don't want to share anything with them. So that's what that is. And then lastly, you can invite people. You just click the invite button. You select the person you want to invite, put in their mobile phone number, their email address, sends them a little invite, and then they connect. What they do is they put in the family code that you send them, and then the first time they log into the app, boom, they get the family history that you've already done. And so they kind of start with that. So for the people that come into the family after all the work's been done, it's kind of easy. I mean, it's nice. Generally speaking, what happens is what they'll do is they'll add their partner and their kids. So you'll get that. You'll get somebody that comes into the family. They're like, oh, cool. And then they add their partner and their kids. And then that gets passed back to you and you accept it and so forth. I was just going to show this really quick. If you were a doctor, like your Dr. Park, and you're logging into the system, this is what they see. But it's a listing of all the patients that have opted them in through the app. But what's kind of cool is when they click on you, they can actually see your family history because you did it. So like this is your family. This is what you did in the app. And then they can see you with the little arrow that's pointing at you. And then they can see your other family members. And so they kind of know like who's at risk. They'll click that risk assessment button at the top. And then this is where they get to run the risk models that I told you about. So Dana-Farber, which is not too far from Johns Hopkins, where Dr. Park was previously at, there in Boston, but they have an algorithm called Bayes-Mendel, which is, again, it's a 5-year and lifetime cancer risk assessment. We're going to be adding that to our software pretty quickly. But for the clinicians, what they can do is they can look at your 5-year and your lifetime risk of cancer for you and then report back to you on their findings. You don't have access to this through the app, but your clinician ultimately would have access to this if you opt them in. And so that's kind of the gist of what we're doing. So I'm going to skip through these screens because they really don't matter. But if you get a sense for, okay, who are these, what is FamGenics and what are they all about? What we're all about is raising the awareness of how important family history is, allowing people to go ahead and begin the process of embracing what's called preventative health care. Preventative health care is you taking charge of your own health care and starting with the first steps. And one of the most important first steps you can take is getting your family history, because it impacts you directly if you've got family members that have been diagnosed with hereditary diseases. And so you kind of start with that. That's the basis. And then that's where you begin. You share that with your clinician, somebody that's like involved in a precision medicine institute. This is like music to their ears. This is like perfect. This is like, okay, great. Now we got a basis to start with. And they kind of go from there. So this is kind of like on the leading edge. My hope is you'll try the app out, and then maybe 5 years from now we'll have some fun, and you can invite me back on and be like, "Hey, Mike, I remember when you were just starting this out."
Yeah, sooner than that, because honestly, the first question that comes out of my mouth or Sherry Ambrose's mouth or Brett's mouth is, do you have your family history written down? Because when Brett was first diagnosed in 2010, after 7 years of having the lump, the first thing the doctors wanted was family history.
Yep.
And I immediately had to go home, question Bob, him get a hold of all of his family members, get a hold of all my family members, and lo and behold, did we find out to date now, there are over 12 women cousins plus Brett, number 13, all with breast cancer. And we would never have known that without having this Excel sheet that has gone around and gone around. So guess what I'm going to start sharing with family members is family genetics, because it'll make life so much easier for all.
Yeah, it is, because it's top of mind when you're going through that. I mean, it's horrendous. So it's top of mind. You go through all that work.
Yes.
And then you get cured, and then 3 years later, you're like, hey, where is all that data? What do we do with that?
Exactly. This will make everybody's life so much easier. So when I am talking to a newly diagnosed survivor or a 7-year survivor that has finally found the coalition, this will be at the top that we'll continue to send out and let them know that this exists, like many other apps that are coming out that don't do exactly what you're doing, Mike, but it's a beautiful thing. And this is all free to the public?
It's free, yeah. So you guys can download this for free, and then patients, or I should say providers, pay for access. So if you link in a clinician. So as you can imagine, we're talking to all the top research institutes, all the top cancer centers. I mean, that's the same client base that I had before. So at Johns Hopkins, Howard Levy and people like that we've dealt with in the past. These are people that are, top notch in the field that know all about this kind of stuff, and this is the kind of stuff that they want. As you can imagine, I mean, think of this in the situation we're in right now. How relevant is this to be able to do this from home? You can gather all this data from home, present it to your clinician, and boom, telemedicine, there it is at work.
Exactly. Dr. Ben, what's your feeling, Dr. Ben?
Well, I'm a little biased because I know this field fairly well, and I know Ambry, and I'm working with some of them as well. I didn't know about this, and I didn't know you were bought by Ambry. Correct me if I'm wrong. That is the company that you said you're, Michael, that ultimately took over the company.
Yeah. So my previous software was Progeny, and that's what we sold to Ambry, and that's what Ambry has right now.
So yeah, I've known about this. I think it's great. I think the other thing with Ambry, so we work with a number of different companies, Myriad and VK, Ambry. But one of the things I'm doing right now, and I'm going to do a plug for Ambry, is trying to do a research contract, because Ambry also have this really new technology that others are following suit on, to use RNA to really see whether or not there are mutations that we traditionally would not find that are hereditary. And exactly what Mike was saying is that my biggest fear is that if you're not in this business, and I've seen this happen time and time again, I think you and I have talked about this before, where there's a strong family history, kind of what Michael was saying, and the need for this type of app. Most of the times when we test, we don't get a positive result. And I've seen clinicians make mistakes and say to that family member, you're okay, you're negative. And I always couch this, you know what? We have 20,000 genes in our bodies, or in a cell. Each cell has 20,000 genes. And yet we're only testing at most nowadays, probably 100 at most, and usually about 30. And so for every family that gets a negative result, it probably just means we haven't figured out in that family what the gene is. And
Yes.
so this new RNA test is actually finding more family mutations that would not be found with just DNA testing. And so we're actually putting that to the test right now, looking to see if we can identify more genetic inheritable or heritable traits that lead to predisposition to cancer, but not only just from the fact or the standpoint of finding what is causing their cancer, but nowadays we know, for example, BRCA1 and 2. Michael, you mentioned precision oncology. That's one of my hats I'm wearing here at Vanderbilt and I did at Hopkins as well. We have drugs now that are really effective for BRCA1 and 2 and probably other genes in that pathway, as well as immunotherapies for what we call mismatch repair genes, which Ambry has also found the RNA testing improves finding these mutations.
Yep.
So this is a whole new ballgame, super exciting. We may actually end up finding a lot more patients nowadays that have heritable types of cancers. Their family history suggests it sometimes it doesn't. But more than even screening or what we call cascade testing of family members, we have real drugs now that can affect a change in their outcomes. To me, that's really, really exciting. And, that's why I've really been working with a lot of companies, including Ambry, to get this moving forward.
Yep. Yeah, that's great stuff.
It's amazing. Well, I mean, this is just fantastic because a lot of the guys don't get their answers. I mean, several have just had mastectomies, and the first thing, one of them never got his family history. I said, before you go in on surgery Monday, you get that history to your doctor and help
That's right.
on the way they treat you. And he did. He worked on it all weekend, and
great.
it's made a huge difference. So, anyone have questions now? Let's open up for questions.
I have a question for Mike. Does it matter? I downloaded your app and I'm going to work on it. Does it matter how incomplete the data is? So can I start out and just get it going on?
Yeah. Start out and do the best you can. I mean, obviously, once you, like, the clinician eventually is going to want as much data as possible because it affects the algorithms.
Right.
But yeah, you can start small. You just do the best you can. And then, generally speaking, kind of like with Ancestry, there's always somebody in your family that knows everything, right?
Exactly.
Like, you got to find who that person is and say, hey, help me out here.
Peggy.
Yeah.
She says that she knows everything.
Yeah,
no,
right.
I mean, I keep the history for family members, and with Brett being diagnosed in 2010, and all 7 other women have now been diagnosed since him in our family. Of course, the first people they're coming to is us to say, where does this stand? And none of us in our family have any mutations running through on any of the testing. I had one called CAD that still to this day, Myriad has no clue if that causes any kind of breast cancer. But I am extremely high risk, and my doctors last November started me as a high risk precaution on Arimidex. And they've got me on it. And Dr. Ben, I eventually want to talk to you about it, but they're saying that will help my high risk not be as high risk, I guess, because I'm the one for Brett that could definitely do it. And also my niece at 33 was diagnosed with breast cancer, my sister's daughter.
Wow.
But none of my generation has had any of the cancers except for my brother Chuck just passed away of a very rare neck cancer that he got 2 years ago. So again, we don't have answers in our family, but we do know our family members are getting breast cancer like crazy, and ovarian cancer, and Brett, and checking out all the others because of his age and stuff. So
Penny, you raise a great point, and testing keeps evolving. So we should probably talk offline at some point because there's more that we could probably do now than when you were originally offered testing.
Exactly, because that was clear back 2014. And like I say, I want to talk to you more in depth about it. Now we all have a little bit more time. But I think knowing your family history, and this is every single one of us on this call and everyone I ever talked to, that is the key. And if these apps, God bless you, Mike, for putting this together, will make it more simple. And I've downloaded the app. I've gone pretty far through it and everything. I got some glitches here and there, and Mike Clancy and I have been talking about them, how, you guys are correcting some of the things. This is what it takes, and it takes each one of you guys to download the app and be open. Say, hey, this isn't working. As Brett says, Mom, I'm sure it's user error, and he's probably right.
I'd like to
in
believe
most
that.
cases. He's probably totally correct in that. And again, a lot of our guys and survivors are older, like myself. I'll be 68 this year. And we've self-taught ourselves to do everything technology-wise. So again, the simpler it can be made to talk to every generation, the better it is. Because otherwise, Brett knows, I'll call him on the phone, Brett, get over here. Your dad and I can't figure out how to make this work. And he'll come over and make it work. But that's in most cases. And these apps will make our life so much easier to keep up to date and to be able to invite other family members in. Wow, this is huge. This is just amazing. So who else might have questions? Yeah.
I do. Mike, mine is actually two different questions. First of all, when was diagnosed, we had no family history on him. And he was the youngest of that generation, and so there really weren't other people to even ask about. He wasn't close with his cousins, so but I'm thinking about his children and his grandchildren. Is this something that I should maybe or could maybe go and download the app and start something on him, even though he is already deceased, but because he had the breast cancer? Is that something that is possible or not?
Yeah, it's a good question. So this will be a good clarity for you guys. So the way the app works is it focuses on you as if you are the patient. So if you download the app, it's gonna focus on you. Now you can add as many family members as you want. So if he's related to you, you kind of cut in and out there a little bit.
Yeah.
But if he's related to you, then yeah, you just simply plug in for him what was his age of diagnosis and what age did he die. So that becomes part of your family history record. And anybody that you invite that's close to him, that's within 1 degree, that's where the impact would be for them. It's going to be most impactful for those people that are within 1 degree. Yeah.
Okay, so possibly for my husband, I would have his daughter download the app because she also had breast cancer.
Yeah, so it's ideal for her to
maybe
download it. Yep, that's right.
So the second question I had is on myself. I don't have any cancer. However, I do have a nephew that actually a great nephew that was recently diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. Is this something that I should maybe have him or his mother download, or should I download it and then send it to them?
Yeah, I mean, as long as they, Jamie, I don't know if you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if she were to download it and fill that out and invite, it would carry over. All that data would pass through, right?
Right. So if you invite other people on that side of the family, they would have that information as well. But yeah, you could certainly let them know about it. I mean, that's not one that's typically quite as commonly inherited as some of the others, like with breast cancer and things like that. But it never hurts for people to know their family history, because as you guys noted, sometimes you find things there that you didn't know that that other people have that might impact the family.
Well, and the only reason I guess I thought about him was because many years ago I did have a cousin that died with Hodgkin's lymphoma, and so I guess that's the only reason I even thought about it.
Yep.
Yeah, Rick, go ahead.
Mike, I just want clarification. You said that your data is never sold it's never participated with anybody. But then you mentioned that you're looking to sell this app to the institutions. So if somebody, let's say, a patient of Dr. Parks fills this out right now, and then you sell this app to the institute to Vanderbilt, will that information then be available to any doctor that wants to access it from Vanderbilt?
So yeah, that's a good question. So here's how that works. The consenting of data from you to your clinician is like the same course of business as it is anytime you go there. So you're protected by HIPAA between you and your clinician. So that stays the same. We don't get involved in that because that's you consenting to your clinician. In terms of whatever their policies are there, they'll disclose that to you. So they may ask you, are you willing to share your data for research purposes? That's your decision between you and your Vanderbilt or whoever it might be. So it's pretty much the same course of business as you experience today. We're not really in between that. But our software as a platform where we store your family history, we basically make a copy of what you've got and give it to Vanderbilt if that's your clinician of choice. Because you're essentially consenting that data to Vanderbilt. So when Vanderbilt connects, they get a copy of your record for the purpose of treating you as a patient, just like it is right now today. So there's really no difference there. What we don't do is we don't sell your data to somebody other than Vanderbilt. We don't take your data and go to some pharmaceutical company or to advertisers or whatever. We don't do that.
Okay, I think I got it.
Okay.
I have a question. When I got my cancer, after I was recovered, they had me do genetic testing, and I didn't have the BRCA gene or anything to be concerned about. And the person that I spoke to told me that most 80% of cancers are non-genetically related. Is that correct? Because I mean, like, for example, in my family, my father had heart attacks. All his brothers did. So I was more concerned about heart disease. The only cancer on my mom's side of the family was lung cancer, and they were very heavy smokers. So is that correct? Only 20% are genetically related?
I don't know about that. Dr. Park, you probably answer that better than me, but.
Well, I was going to say, I think it depends on what you define as genetics. All cancers are diseases of DNA, and DNA is genetics when you think about it. I think the kind of information that you're being told is whether or not it's hereditary.
Yeah,
and whether or not you have a predisposing gene like BRCA1 or BRCA2 that increases your risk. But I would couch that with the data that even with your BRCA1 and 2, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to get a breast or ovarian or other cancers, because cancer is an accumulation of multiple genetic mistakes or hits, as we call them. And if you have one that you inherit, that kind of accelerates that process because you've already got one foot in the door, so to speak, to cancer. Most cancers, we believe, are anywhere from 3 to 8 genetic hits or mutations or alterations. And so that can take about 5 to 6 decades of life before it manifests. If you already have inherited one, then you're about 10 years earlier because you got that foot in the door. So it's not to say that only 20% are genetic, so to speak. It probably is right now about 20% we can identifiably say we found this gene in your family that seems to predispose. But as I was saying earlier, you have to remember that we're only testing right now for 30 to maybe 100 genes at most.
Right.
And yet we have 20,000 genes in our body. So I suspect, and we've even published on this, the more you test, the more you will find. The harder part is you find these genes that you don't really know how much influence they actually have on that patient's breast cancer. And so, we've gotten pushback on the study that we published that said, oh, well, these genes have never been shown to really increase risk of breast cancer. But I actually kind of put it back and said, well, they've also never been shown to not increase the risk.
Right.
And so I think what we are learning now is that everyone's a little bit different and everyone's family is a little bit different. And what you're seeing, and I'm a big advocate for this, there are some cases, if you look at the cancer, in conjunction with the genetics, you can actually say, aha, this cancer was actually related to the predisposition that was inherited. There's a classic example of this, of something that we call Lynch syndrome. It's usually colorectal cancers, but they can have other cancers like brain cancers, endometrial cancers, ovarian cancers, and sometimes breast cancer. And so what we've now learned, and I've had patients both ways. I've had patients who have a known gene that they've inherited, and when you look at their breast cancer, it is clearly a result of that heritable gene mutation, because there are certain features that we call things like microsatellite instability, mismatch repair, that let you know, and you can molecularly analyze it and realize that the genes are inactivated. So you know that that breast cancer, as rare as it is, but it's been described now many times, that was related to the inherited gene defect. On the other hand, I've also had patients, I'm thinking of one in particular, who had colon cancer, which is usually what they get. She had a known mutation in their family. She developed breast cancer. But you got to remember, regular breast cancer is pretty common. 1 in 8 women in this country will get breast cancer. So I thought, oh, well, she may have breast cancer that's related to this gene because I've seen it before. Not true. When we examined her breast cancer, she did not have breast cancer that was related to that hereditary gene defect. It was a regular breast cancer. So what I've been pushing for, and part of the study that we published last year, is we got to stop thinking so black and white. Everyone's a little bit different, and what we really should be doing is focusing on the cancer and the heritable genes and figuring out what really is contributing to this patient cancer. Because as I said earlier, that actually matters nowadays in terms of therapy.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. That was very good. I got it.
Appreciate that. Definitely. All right. So any other questions? Otherwise, what I also want to remind everybody, we have pushed off the conference that was going to be April 23rd through the 26th. And our dates that we were able to secure with the hotel right now is April 6th through the 9th. So mark that. August 6th through the 9th. Thank you, Pat. 2020. So it would run from the Thursday all the way through the Sunday morning. Everybody check out. So we would love to make sure that hopefully everybody who's going to attend can attend, and maybe we'll get some newer attendees from this. But any other questions out there? I don't think so. Rick, we can't thank you enough for always being so hospitable to the Male Breast Cancer Coalition. And Brett, anything you would like to say in closing?
Riley's yelling at me to get off, so no, I don't have anything. Thanks for everybody for attending. It's the first one actually that I've been able to sit fully through. Right. Normally I'm at work and everything, so.
Yeah, well, we can't thank Dr. Ben and Mike again. Everybody go sign up for the app, start testing it. Let's help Mike to bring this to the best it can be, because I think and Mike, you have an open invitation for somebody from you all, even yourself, to please come to the conference. We'd love to have you be a speaker to everyone.
Where's it at?
Here in Kansas City. We're going to host it at our brand
new Royals game. Can't miss that.
At the brand new Lowe's Hotel.
There you go.
It hasn't even opened. Now they postponed because of COVID for opening, which was going to open April 2nd.
Yeah.
I think you guys have a pretty good football team.
That's right.
They got a great one.
Yes, we are. And on top of it, on that Thursday night, you'll get to eat mama burgers here at the house with everybody.
Nice.
So it's going to be amazing. So everybody, open invitation, and we'll put you down as a speaker, and it will just be amazing.
That's
once we get this all going. And if not, we'll do you as a tele
there you go. I'll try and get there. There's some good beers in Kansas City.
Oh, we got beers. We got food like barbecue.
There you go. Right there. There it is.
I saw Dr. Ben drinking. I couldn't let him drink alone.
That's
Nice.
right. Hell of a deal.
By the way, you know,
Yeah.
Michigan.
Oh, that's a great beer.
Cheers
Two Hearted Ale.
to
There we go.
everyone. So until our next call, which will be April now, and we'll go with our regular fourth Thursday now, Rick. So put that back down, and pray to God everybody stays healthy. I have two relatives in ICU right now with COVID-19, and they're in Houston, so we know Houston's getting hit like crazy. And so just
Dang.
pray for the world. That's all we can do. That's all we
Amen.
can do.
Amen.
If
No doubt.
if you want to reach out, I mean, you don't have to have a presentation. If you want to reach out to your membership so they have a forum to talk to each other in, maybe about COVID-19, or, you know, we can help you socially undistant here.
Oh, okay.
To do it.
That would-
So if you would like to use the platform between now and the end of April, be in touch with
Excellent.
me and we will find a time. We'll try and keep you in this room because having two rooms is confusing, right?
Yes. 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 It is, but that would be amazing. Okay, so we'll reach out to the.
Reach out and you can have just a discussion between the guys on how they're managing with their COVID-19, and it's just a good way for people to get together at a time like this.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Well, God bless everyone. We thank you all, and we'll have the recording up soon so you can share it back out with anybody. Michael Singer or Dave,
Thank you.
Kendall,
See you
we
guys.
thank you all, and
Enjoyed
especially our speakers. God bless all.
Have a good one.
Thank
See you
you.
guys. Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Stay safe, everybody.
Bye.